Hi everyone, welcome back to 33 Founders. I'm really excited that you're with us today because I'm here with Greg Hong, the co-founder and CEO of Reserve, an app that acts as your personal concierge to the hottest restaurants in town. Thanks so much for being with us, Greg.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So Greg, as I just shared with you, when I was doing my research on Reserve, I was so blown away about how heavily committed you are to working with your partner restaurants. Can we start out with you explaining why that's been so important to your early success?
Yeah, of course. From the very first moment that we got moving, it was about interacting with restaurants and really learning what they liked and didn't like, about what they had and had on a day-to-day interacted with as it relates to technology. And as we started talking to our restaurant partners, I think so much of what we realized is that there was a real gap in terms of most of the products they had were very consumer focused. I think as we started kind of working with them, it was a reality check for us to realize that we could start to build out things that would make a big difference for the way they interacted with their diners and really just kind of ran their day-to-day business. You talk to most chefs, and I think at the end of the day, they will tell you, my one goal is to make sure that people leave my restaurant happy. That's success for them. And as we kind of started building our products, it very much dovetailed with that mantra. How do we build products that are helping them make sure that diners are leaving their restaurant happy?
You touched on this extensively in a piece you worked on with First Round Capital, and you guys actually talked to nearly all of the 100+ restaurants you're working with every day, which again just totally blew my mind. Is this why you're going to win in this very competitive industry with Reserve, Greg?
I think it is. I mean, it's there's such a big part of what we're building and really are an extension of what Reserve is. So much of what Reserve is delivering is we're really a lightweight layer that lives between a diner and a restaurant and allowing the two of those parties to connect directly. So as much as we possibly can work with them to kind of find out what that dialogue should look like between their diners and themselves, we're hoping to facilitate and helping to facilitate just that. So at every step along the way, by getting their feedback, we are improving what that communication layer looks like. And that just kind of is how it all ties together for us, is really listening to them. When we build new features, we put them in front of them first. We make sure that they're on point for them, that they're meeting their needs, and that we're getting feedback across the board, to really make sure that it's done thoughtfully and it's done to their benefit. I should say with all of this, let me take a step back and kind of tell you a little bit about what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Would love to kind of make sure that your listeners kind of understand what Reserve is, how it works, and so forth. So really, at Reserve itself, we're a concierge for diners, right? At its core, if you're a diner, you want to go out to eat. Maybe it's the weekend is coming and you've got a few friends in town. At that point, generally what you might do is go around to a bunch of different review sites or otherwise and really kind of go in circles. Instead, with Reserve, we're here to help. We're going to make sure that we're making that experience really easy for you. So you decide you want to go out to eat. We're going to give you a really curated list of restaurants that are in your area. We're going to make sure we get you seated at a great restaurant, at a great table. As you go in to eat at the restaurant, you're going to have a great experience in the restaurant, and we're going to handle payment automatically for our diners as well. It's a really elegant way to end the meal. I mean, as I was kind of touching on, restaurants and chefs wanting to have their diners leave happy. It's very transactional right now. If you think of what modern day dining is, this concept of bringing a credit card out and fumbling through your wallet, and even in some cases, I have friends that they'll break out a tip calculator. They'll have a tip card or an app on their phone that is used just for creating and calculating what the appropriate tip should be on a meal. To be able to have all that done automatically and elegantly at the end of the meal is something that's really great. And more importantly, it's something that's resonated with our diners. Organically, we've seen a lot of our diners that are posting to Twitter, to Instagram. They're posting photos of our check as paid cards at the end of the meal, and really for us, that's validation that those diners love the experience that they're having. And the last piece of that is feedback, right? You talked about our restaurant partners. We want to let them know what they're doing well, what they're doing poorly, and how they can really deliver that great experience for their diners.
One of the things you mentioned right now, Greg, is the check is paid card. And I've seen that all over social media. So whether it's big thought leaders like Mark Andreessen saying, hey, I just used Reserve, they're really onto something, or some of your investors like Hunter Walk and Rob Hayes, How
Sure.
are you getting people to post that online?
I wish I could tell you it was. I mentioned it was in the last segment. It's actually been quite organic. It hasn't been, ironically, a lot of us prodding them. You know, what it turned out to be was we started kind of having people that were going through. They were dining on reserve, and that was their expression to their friends, their families, and so forth, and their colleagues. That wow, this is a great experience. You guys should try this. And it was a really visual representation of that. I think so much of what we've delivered to our diners is really this experience from start to finish. You raise your hand and you decide that you're hungry and your tummy's grumbling and you're ready to go out to eat. You know, when you start thinking about what that looks like, it's just an experience really from start to finish, and that's the representation of that. You know, I think so much of our focus is with all of this, how do we make the experience better for our diners and restaurants? So we're really focused on both sides. You know, each and every time you go out to eat, every step along the way, we're going to make it better for everyone.
And I know one of the things you guys have at Reserve is weekly feedback meetings. So everyone comes together and you guys discuss what you learned during the week. Can you give us a glimpse into what those meetings are like?
Yeah, you know, so we'll have routine meetings with our ops teams every Friday. We actually our VP of operations and marketing. She actually meets up with all of our general managers from all of our cities. We spend generally about an hour on all of those calls, and then we're cycling all of that feedback that we got back from all of our restaurant partners and the markets at large to kind of understand what's going well and what's going poorly. Then we have an internal meeting there on top of that to discuss across the team, so across the functional roles, right? What does our tech team need to do, and what does our product team need to do to help deliver better products to market?
So as you guys expand to Chicago, DC, and London, a lot of exciting plans for you. You're going to have to be bringing on people in each of those locations. What are the primary traits you look for in new hires?
You know, we're looking for people that are hungry, you know, people that really want to work hard. I mean, in the early days of any market for us, it's about getting out there and really pounding the pavement, talking to restaurants. You know, a lot of this partnership stuff that we've been talking about today, sharing that vision with our restaurateurs, helping them to understand that we're not just in there trying to sell them another piece of technology. So really for us, it's people that really are embracing that side of it. They also have to understand and embrace what our company vision is, you know, and really be behind the fact that they're going to be out there every day fighting the good fight and selling and talking to restaurants about how we can improve their experiences.
I know a lot of things you guys do with the restaurants is you actually go in, you do demos, you do your best to know everyone there by name. So when they call you, they feel like, hey, they actually know who I'm talking to. I'm not just a number. When you're interviewing someone for a new position to come on in one of these locations, how do you know they're going to do a great job when I call from a restaurant and say, hey, I'm having this issue, can you help me out?
You know, I mean, I think part of that's the interview process. Part of that's, you know, making sure that we're getting good referrals. You know, as part of our process, our internal process, we're running potential candidates through what our day-to-day is, running them through the questions that they might see and interact with and seeing how they respond. And yet, while some of it is trained and some of it's guided towards people in terms of how to interact, some of it's also just the innate people that we're hiring and their traits, their personal traits, making sure that we're finding people that fit that mold.
So going back briefly to your partners, you mentioned in that first round post that if you have an opportunity to show your partner that you care, you should do it every time. I completely agree with that, but I also think it's a little bit confusing. How do you know when you're going to act on that feedback and when you don't act on it?
You know, I think the nice part about this is the feedback that we're getting from restaurants happens to be pretty consistent across all of our markets.
It's convenient.
Right? Yeah, it is. So I mean, it's not like we're having like 15 different data points and we're getting a lot of outliers. There's a lot more consensus from our restaurants where they're having very similar problems because ironically they're all using very similar technologies. So their pain points seem to be pretty consistent across markets. Yeah, there are some that are outliers. You know, I think the things that we're kind of focused on with our restaurants, you know, we've got a couple of tenants, right? So The first one is we really want to put our restaurant partners back in control of the dining room. We don't require our restaurant partners to hold tables for us. And more importantly, when our diners are trying to go out to eat with Reserve, they'll generally express a time window of generally about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes on average. With our restaurants, you can imagine they're trying to put together that jigsaw puzzle for all their tables and all the people that want to eat at those tables. So for them to kind of have that flexibility from our diners really helps kind of them take that control of their dining room. Now, the second part of that is we're free to our restaurant partners. So we actually don't charge our restaurants a penny. Generally restaurants operate on very thin margins. And for us, if we can build out a platform that ultimately helps them run leaner and more importantly is a cost savings center for them as it relates to diner acquisition, it's a real win for them. And the last part is, as we keep kind of rehashing here, is this part about pulling together strong partnerships with our restaurants. It's not something we take lightly. It's as you know, and as we've kind of talked about today, it's something that's important to us. And the aggregate of all three of those is really kind of where it's a strong part of our business.
And one of the things, Greg, it comes up with your partners, it comes up with the press, it comes up with people that you're pitching. You've been very strong about having a long view perspective. So can you give us a couple examples of what that means? You can do it with Reserve, but let's say I'm a young startup founder, I have this great idea. What is a long view perspective? Like, how far do I take it out?
For us, a lot of times we'll talk about ideas that are 3-4 years out sometimes. They're pie in the sky ideas, but it gets you thinking and it challenges us, it challenges our staff. Wow, like what if we were to do this long term? Okay, great. How would we build into that? And some of it is just an evolution of some of the short-term ideas on top of that, right? So we take what the next 6 months would look like and we go, oh, okay, well, let's put ourselves in that spot of, okay, let's say it's January now. When we build some of these other things that we're talking about, and now we're in July, what is that going to allow us to do? What kind of business development partnerships are we going to be able to do now? What kind of other products are we going to be able to layer on top of this really solid foundation? And what kind of product offerings can we give back to our diners in our case? But it's the aggregate of all those things. So some of it's the thinking and putting yourself in that mindset that you're a little bit further down the road. And then backing into, wow, okay, how would some of these longer term goals net out, and how do we ultimately start to plan for them now? I think one of the things that we've realized is, we are looking at some pretty big offerings that we're going to be pulling together in June, July of this year. We got to make sure that the stuff that we're building now dovetails really nicely with that, because otherwise we're going to be building it and one version of what we need now and a separate version of what we need later. So in effect, you're building it twice, versus kind of hitting nice little pit stops along the way that kind of make sense contextually.
So with that, let's say if we're sitting and we're in the Reserve office, you guys can talk about ideas in July of this year and in July of 2020. You have total freedom. But let's say you're sitting with potential investors. How far do you take that? Do you take it to July of this year, July of next year?
The focus with potential investors a lot of times will be, 6 months, a year. There will be less focus on terms of July of 2020. It's more of a toss out, pie in the sky, and it's fun for us too. It's it helps us kind of express that, hey, we are thinking well beyond just the next 6 months and the next year. So I hope that kind of gives some context.
So you talk about the future. What are you most excited about this year for Reserve?
Some of that stuff is a little bit hard to talk about, but I will tell you, we're excited. What we're focused on now and kind of over the next couple of months is focusing on new markets that we're building out. Stuff as simple as check splitting. It's our most requested feature, and it's something that we're excited to just be able to roll out there. So there's a lot of kind of short-term things that are just kind of asks that our diners have made and our restaurant partners have made that really at this point feel like table stakes to us, only in the sense that we are already starting to build them, spec them out, and so forth. But yeah, stuff like check splitting is probably an easy example of something that's on our radar, and we're excited to kind of be able to deliver to the market.
So I don't know if you can say anything about this, but one of the things you guys have started doing is having specials with different partner restaurants. There might be a special menu for people who are using Reserve. Will we see more of this in 2015?
For us, in the short term, the immediate focus is, hey, how do we deliver on our core competencies?
Okay.
We want to make sure that stuff like check splitting, stuff like, the early points we talked about today, that every step along the way we're taking care of you. So if it comes to a recommendation and getting you seated at a great restaurant, we want to make sure that we're delivering that really well. We want to make sure that we're delivering the end of the meal experience really well and working with our restaurant partners to make sure that check is paid card gets delivered. We want to get diner feedback in every time to kind of make sure that we're improving the experiences of our diners. So those are kind of probably the early kind of goals for us this year, making sure that we're delivering on what Reserve is and that core of that each and every time.
Great. So I know you're busy, so I'm just going to ask you two more questions.
Yeah, of course.
The first one is, one of the things I've learned the most since I graduated last May is the importance of relationships. Something my dad has been drilling into my little brother in my head for a very long time, but I didn't believe him, of course, until now.
Sure.
And your story really reinforces it. You and Joe, who's also the co-founder at Reserve, met when you guys worked at TrueX. Then you went off to do 1111 and then convened to start this. You guys had lunch in LA and said, hey, we can do this experience a lot better. What did you do to reach out to people after you had that lunch to start making Reserve a reality?
I think part of that is, the history there in the first place, right? We had a history of relationships. So it was really a little bit more organic than that, in the sense that it became an idea, and rather than having to go out and pitch people on it, it was more along the lines of, hey, we had the idea, let's just keep talking about it with friends and people that are and continue to be in our network. And that's kind of how it happened a little more organically. Like, hey, we've got this idea we're working on. What do you think? Do you like it? Do you think this is going to be good, bad? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And in that sense, it was almost leveraging existing relationships to help us kind of grow this. And as we started to see the idea resonate with people, as we kind of talked even through the initial vision, where I think we had some wireframes and some initial designs, and that was about it. But people, when you described it to them, they could get their arms around it and really kind of take a bite out of it and really be like, okay, great, I see what this is. Oh, by the way, would love to be involved, would love to support you. And I guess in that sense, it happened quite a bit more organically.
So you talk about it happening organically because of the network that you already had. And that's something, of course, when you first started out in entrepreneurship, you had to work to build. For people who are in my shoes who, just graduated, or maybe they're 35, they're just coming into the startup world, what are some organic ways to build relationships? Because I can never tell, how can I naturally reach out to people and when am I bombarding them?
Sure, and I think part of that is reaching out through the appropriate channels. So, if you're going to events and you're meeting people in the natural course of business, if you're within your own network with whatever jobs or otherwise that you might have, kind of leveraging that network to go to events with people that have a different network than you might. That's where it becomes valuable. But I think Joe and myself in the early days, I remember Joe all the time going to as many events as he possibly could, just trying to meet as many people as he could. And as a byproduct of that, I ended up, kind of working with Joe and kind of obviously we hung out in the same circles, and as a result, built my network. I think that's a big part of that experience, though, is kind of making yourself available and taking the time to actually meet people in person. It goes a long way.
So my last question is a question I'm going to end every 33 Founders episode with this season. I've been really looking forward to our conversation because from the outside, it really looks like, Greg, you've got it all together. And in my 20s, and I know a lot of my friends and young entrepreneurs are facing this, there's a lot of uncertainty and quarter-life crises, which I've become acquainted with and I don't like. What advice do you have, or what advice would you give yourself when you were in this position on how to beat that uncertainty?
Get in there and get your hands dirty. First and foremost, I think having a breadth of knowledge is everything. It's hard to make decisions within kind of what direction to head and otherwise when you only have a limited base of knowledge. So I got exposure to a lot of different industries and a lot of different things along the way. And as a result, it made kind of figuring out the next steps that much easier every step. The first gig I had, it was kind of like, oh yeah, I kind of know what I want to do. But without having that wisdom and that perspective, it's very difficult to kind of focus in. And as that breadth of knowledge becomes better, you can synthesize different ideas. So that's probably the core of it.
Get your hands dirty. I love it.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna. I really appreciate you taking the time with me today to kind of put me on the show.